that we have been live in the Facebook group. We've never done this before. This is the first time.
This is my first time. I've never done a
Yeah.
YouTube live.
Not Facebook. Yeah, YouTube. There we go. I said Facebook. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
Facebook,
Well,
YouTube. Which one is it?
we're
But
everywhere.
I'm super pumped because this is the start of the year, and the podcast we're going to be doing live. You'll still be able to get. It'll still be up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, but every Tuesday at 1 p.m. I'm going to be going live with the podcast, and I figured, what better way to start the year than with you, Josh? What better way? It's the best way.
I mean, people do call me, New Year's rebirth Josh. So I don't know.
What is it? New Year's baby. It's like New Year's Josh. You need like that sash or whatever.
Right. I feel like I need a tiara.
And what I love about this, you still are, you are a mentor in songwriting for guitar, but you're still my mentor because I send you shit all the time where I'm like, hey, how's this mix? Is it okay? Is it still, so it's not like I'm like, you mentor other people. No, it's like I still bombard you all the time with texts and voice better. Hey, is this mix better? And what we're going to get into is I want to talk about out of the box thinking this episode. And we're going to do, if there's some of you here, there will be a little Q&A section. If you got questions, you can throw them in the little chat bubble. But we're just going to dig into this, and this is going to be awesome. But out of the box thinking, Josh, what do you think when you hear that phrase too, especially when it relates to music? What comes to mind for you?
Man, the thing that I think about is the frustration. But, all right, just like cutting right to it. I think about the Picasso quote of something paraphrasing to the effect of learn all the rules so you can learn when to break them.
Yeah,
something to that effect. I'm butchering it, but something like that. And the thing that I always think about is like all the music lessons and education that I had, and how many times that does and does not give me the resources that I need in the songs that I'm working on, in the productions and stuff like that. There's so many times where I'm like, oh yeah, like learning the rules of like how to use a compressor or how to use a EQ or ways to rhyme words and stuff like that. Like all that stuff's really useful and I use it every day. But man, there's not enough focus on what happens when those things don't work. Like how do I get out of this? Like what do I do?
And it's not just in the production sense, in the networking sense, in the connection sense. It's just the songwriting sense. You can use things that give you a guideline and give you a blueprint.
Yeah.
But, and there are books about it. Here's the blueprint to a great song. Here's the blueprint to production. But there's no book that says, here's out of box thinking when you use the blueprint and it doesn't work. And you still have to figure it out and you still have to complete it.
Yeah. And you make a great point, like, whether it's like networking, mixing, songwriting, anything. And I was going to mention that when I was thinking about this morning, that man, like the more I work on my creative thinking and out of the box thinking, it applies to so many things in life. Like so many like non-music things, like personal relationships, like all kinds of things. Like, yeah.
Well, it's like if we go into different, I guess we can break it up into three things. So there's the production side, there's the songwriting side, and there's the networking side. If you think of the songwriting side, if you think like, okay, so I've been told that I need to structure this verse, chorus, second verse, chorus, bridge. Okay, here we go. Let's go into it. And you get into but your co-writer is crabby, or your co-writer isn't in a good mood, or your co-writer's sad, or your co-writer's depressed. It's just like, what was I'm looking through, what is it, the Berklee School of Music. It's just, they didn't have anything about that if you're co-writing. So it's like, you have to really navigate some of these waters with being like, okay, how am I going to approach this? Am I going to see the bigger picture that I want the song, or do I see the bigger picture that, here's what needs to happen. I actually need to value the relationship. And I need to nurture the relationship. In, let's say, pitching, you pitch a song. Well, they don't like it.
Right.
What do you do? Or it's just like, well, how do you find these people too? Do you just go up to the door? You have to think of ways that you're going to navigate it, because I think out of the box thinking leads to people that end up doing it. And those that don't like doing out of the box thinking just end up in the sea of frustration.
Right. Yeah. And even like, Yeah, there's so many different ways because I mean, I'll admit, like, I'm not the strongest networker, friend maker. I'm kind
Mhm,
of an introvert, so I've even found that, my out of the box solution for pitching
mhm.
is to, like, partner with people who are better at that. Like, that's, because I've tried different avenues and things like that. So, like, even just like delegating or partnering, those can be like, you don't have to do everything yourself. Like, you don't have to be like the,
I think
Superman.
right there, that's the idea too. It's like seeing beyond uh, with out of the box thinking. You look at the things that are not your strength or not necessarily your strong suit instead of being sad about it or being like
Right.
frustrated or going to get a book or going to get a course. You
Yeah.
look at like, oh, cool. Now I've pinpointed what is considered my weakness. And
Hmm.
I need to find someone that fits that strong suit that is really that's a book that I love is called Who Not How, in which they talk about
Yes.
that literally that specific I know I've told you about I'm like,
I've,
Who Not
I've
How?
read it.
Because
It's good.
it's so true because if you're
Yeah.
finding that person that fits what maybe you don't necessarily enjoy it, maybe it's not your strong suit, but you understand the value. And
Yeah.
out of the box way is just being like, cool, let's just partner together. And
Mhm.
out of the box thinking too is you making your case of what your strength is. So that
Yeah.
person understands the value. And I think people that do that out of the box thinking have that connection, are able to visibly see when like, oh yeah, you know what? They have something that I don't have, but combined.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So much of this is like very, very much a mindset type of thing. Cause, like, I grew up with parents who were very frugal and always like trying to solve their problems themselves. And there's definitely value in that. Like, my dad would change his own oil instead of like driving down to the Jiffy Lube and paying somebody
Yeah.
to do it and stuff like that. So I come from that mindset of like, I'll just figure it out. I'll do it all myself. And the more I kind of go through this, like, one, it's like difficult to scale. Like, I can only do so many songs when I'm doing everything myself. I can only do so many songs in a year. And if I ever want to do more songs, like, I have to hand some of that stuff off. And yeah, it's just very much a mindset thing, like getting
I
out of
think
that.
that's what's interesting about three theory music for you. You made that pivot where it was like, okay, I only have so many styles, so many songs.
Right.
Then you started repping other people's songs. You started bringing them onto your catalog, which I'm like, that's brilliant. And it's
Yeah.
like, talk about like, you're like, listen, I'll bring you in. I'm going to be doing the pitch, but you just expanded your catalog without you being like, okay, I got to make this hip hop album. And then Josh drops a hip hop out. And really, it's just like, it's how long would it take you to master hip hop?
Right. Yeah. And I've dabbled in that.
Yeah.
Like, could I even like just make like a legit authentic sounding like hip hop beat? And it's just not. And the other thing is like, do I find joy from that? There's some like
Yeah.
genres or things or whatever sounds that I can identify with or I'm curious about. Like, I have that passion to go kind of figure out that puzzle. And then there's other genres, styles, like I've never done polka and I don't really have a passion to go figure it out. Um, so like being honest with yourself about those kind of things too.
And I think
Yeah.
out of the box thinking, you saw the value of like, what would happen if I did expand? What if I did bring someone? And what if I brought in people that did this? And, I may not get all of it, but I'll get a percentage. They get a percentage. There's value in what we can do for each other. I
Hmm.
think that to me, as you said, scale. And I think out of the box thinking, people they scale. Where
Yeah.
as opposed to feeling like it's funny you mentioned your parents, my dad is the same way.
Yeah.
It's like changes, all those things, just like, go to the library, get a book. And I
Yeah.
think especially in music, people think, "Well, I took the course. Well, I
Hmm.
got the book." I think
Yeah.
that and it's not necessarily always entitlement, but there's this verge of just like, "Well, then it's gonna happen." Yeah, it might, but you might also have to I don't know if anybody will get this rest. I think of MacGyver. I think of when MacGyver would like put together shit that you're just
Yeah.
like, how do you do that? It's just like, I'm gonna make a bomb with this gum and this shoestring and this French fry. And it's like, wow. It's just like
Yeah.
a lot of music is a lot of MacGyvering your way a little bit.
Mhm.
into situations and things where it was like, okay, on paper, this is what they say I'm supposed to do. This says this compressor should be here in the limiter, but I'm listening to it and it just doesn't sound right. It
Right.
doesn't sound right. But when I throw on this thing that's actually supposed to be used for a guitar, it's exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah.
There's
That was
no book on that. There's
yeah,
nothing.
that was a huge mindset thing for me too, is that, I started that way, like, you read the book on
Yeah.
like how to record an acoustic guitar, and they're like, put the mic 6 inches away from 12th fret, and then put your compressor in like this, and you kind of do that, and you're like, okay, I got a very like standard vanilla, totally passable acoustic guitar recording, but it doesn't sound great. Like, how do I get it to sound great? And like that's where the book usually ends, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody there like saying like, okay, because so many instruments are different, like they can only like give you that beginning step, and then after that, then that's when the out of the box thinking starts.
I love that word vanilla you said. It's not bad.
It's not bad.
It's
Yeah.
not bad, but is it that thing that pushes it to where it, like, moves up a level? And
Yeah.
it's like, sometimes doing things on your own, not bad. It's
Mhm.
not bad, but there's no other level. It's like it's a ceiling very early that you hit, and
Yeah.
vanilla is kind of like that. It's not, but it's baseline. It's like,
Mhm.
it's okay. If you think of songs that we love and things that we do, there's like this extra thing, there's this component that people sometimes can say what it is, but they're not sure, but there's just something about it, and I always say that's that out of the box next thing.
Mhm.
Um, my
Yeah.
vanilla is my favorite flavor, and you know what? I have to admit, vanilla is my favorite flavor as well, but
Yeah.
it's always paired with something. And
Right.
it's like, and I think, and so it's just like, it's not bad, but like, vanilla with sprinkles, vanilla with some sort of thing that takes it to another level.
Yeah.
And out of the
And
box thinking is that's it.
yeah, and I wanna say that, like, in some scenarios, like, it's very like, in, kind of
Yeah.
getting back to the song and production and stuff like that, it's very important to have those vanilla tracks in there. Like, if you like, let's say, staying with the acoustic guitar, if you're doing a track where it's drums, bass, acoustic guitar, piano, vocal, and it
Mhm.
really is like a Cerebrellis piano vocal, um, focus song, like, you can tell, like, that's who's, like, leading this track, right? You don't want that acoustic guitar to be really anything more than vanilla. It's just back there just playing support. You don't want it to have all this character getting in the way of, because it's supposed to be a piano, the piano and the vocal are supposed to be where all the character is. At least
But
that's how
even
I hear it.
all of that you're mentioning too, the idea of like, oh, if this is like a Sarah Bareilles track, or this is like an early, track, the idea of you just listening to it and
Mhm.
applying those sounds and testing and figuring out the configuration is a form of out of the box, because
Yeah.
we can't go, there's no book that says like, okay, here's the standard formula for Sarah Bareilles. And it's like, oh, okay. Here's the
Mhm.
standard formula for Machine Gun Kelly. Here's the standard. There's all the components. You have to do some sort of baseline and then go out of the box.
Yeah.
So the baseline gets you there. So there's nothing wrong with all those things. The books and the courses, all of them are awesome, but they're a starting point. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's where I notice a lot of people too that graduate from like a music school and they're like, I graduated. And I'm like, awesome. You have just started because it's
Yeah,
only just begun, because you have to dive in. You have to do a whole bunch of writes and you have to do terrible writes only to figure out how to make them work well. You have to do, I have, especially you were my guide early in production. I have a hard drive full of awful, terrible songs that were just, some were totally in the box, some were
yeah,
barely a box, some were just like the box was barely held together. And then
yeah.
there were some where it was like what you're describing. It's not bad,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I can't get behind this song and I don't know why. And only
Yeah,
now as I look back and I'm like, oh, it was pretty vanilla. It wasn't bad, but it was like,
yeah,
it's not the thing that I would want to listen to again and again and again.
yeah.
What is that then? What can we identify or name that thing?
Yeah, do you know, like, you hit on something that nobody ever talks about, like, I've got those too, right? I've got
Yeah.
songs from my past where I listen to them and I cringe, it's like just horrible. And then I've got that phase where I like start to like my mixes and production start to sound okay. I've got this like vanilla phase, right? And
Yeah.
then things like now I'm in this phase where I feel like I've got a personality. My tracks like they not only I think sound good, but they start to have like a uniqueness that I can kind of call my own. The thing that offends me the most, like on a core level, is that vanilla phase where like they sound just okay,
Yeah.
and it was so frustrating. I mean, at the time, I was like proud, like, oh, these like mixes, like they sound good, like in my car, they sound good on these other speakers, like, and they're getting placed, so like that's cool. But yeah, just like that was like a tough point for me of like just having these kind of just B plus songs and having to break out of that. That really that was a period where like I had to do a lot of out of box thinking and personal reflection of like what I've got this, but now what rules can I break to make it more unique to give it more flavor? What can I do here?
And I love that idea that you were like, they were getting placed, and also all the things that you kind of the check marks where it's like, I'm listening in the car and it sounds good. I have my AirPods, it sounds good. So it's checking all the boxes that people say to check.
You're right.
But
Now
I'm
what?
like, ugh, it's like, okay. I think out of the box and also to break I think out of the box and breaking rules are kind of like they're a little intertwined, I
Yeah,
think. In
yeah.
this idea, it's kind of going like, well, okay, the things that you're drawn and creatives that do this, they do kind of that obscure little weird thing that on paper, if you read it out loud, it doesn't make sense.
Mm,
And maybe it's not supposed to sometimes, but when you actually implement it, it
yeah,
totally does. Like, I hate isotope vocal synth on vocals. Sounds
yeah,
awful. I think
yeah.
it's terrible. Sounds great on guitar, but the only way
Oh,
that I did that was because I had this clean guitar and it was the setting for the chorus. I was just like, I'm just, it's just it was a clean vanilla guitar. The gain
yeah.
structure was great. It was recorded, and I was like, "This sounds good," but, like, man,
I have
just
never
that
tried that.
it was
Now I'm all
writ and
curious.
I was like and that's always my go-to now. Like, when I have, like, a moment, I'm like, "Ah, I know what I'm gonna do," and I do it, and they're like, "Vocal set," and I do it, and they're like, "Whoa," and I'm like, "I know," but it was only because
Huh.
it was so weird. It was
Yeah,
so out of the box that I was like either and that's what's great about out of the box. You kinda either have there's no kind of, like, in the middle. It's like, either it's really gonna work or you'll know, like, "Mm-mm, that's
yeah,
it's the
yeah,
wor
yeah.
it just explo it's terrible. It's the worst thing ever."
That's interesting. Like, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole here,
Yeah.
but I am curious, like, I would have never thought something like vocal synths because that is designed for, like, a mono sound, for a
Yeah.
mono vocal. So do you use it just on single line guitars, or
Yeah,
does it work on
it
chords?
was like a single line guitar, and it was like a picking
Okay.
part that was just so it was adding a layer to something, and I was like, "Oh," and you opened my eyes to the idea of adding layers, and that to me was out of the box of like, "Oh, it says guitar, but I could layer this other thing in between, and it doesn't have to be guitar, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
can actually elevate the part itself and lift it up." But the guitar part itself wasn't bad, and I looked and I was like, "Okay, it's tuned properly, it's not the part itself, I still like it, it's not interfering with the vocal, it's just like, even if I mute it, I'm like, it still feels like there's nothing there." And then
yeah,
I was like, "Well, let me add something to it." I was like, "Well, not a chorus pedal." It's like because I tried some of the stock ones, I'm like, "That didn't work." I was like, "Well, there's this for the chorus and vocal synth. Maybe it does something weird that I don't know." And
yeah,
it
yeah,
did. It was like this modulator that was just so bizarre. I was like, "Ah, it's weird. I love it." And
yeah,
I think that's the thing too, that out of the box thinking is like, I don't know, from a songwriting and a producer standpoint and a networking standpoint, it's like when you're in high school, you break free of what for years your mom or your parents you dress a certain way because your parents just pick out clothes and you're like, yeah, whatever. And then in
yeah,
high school, you just like see people with different styles and you're like, oh, and you try them on to just like start to discover what is the thing. And some are totally out of place. Like I had the wallet chain back in the day, and now I'm like, God, I wouldn't. Are you kidding me? I wouldn't. But there's
yeah,
some aspects that I'm like, oh no, there we go. That's my thing right there. And I think that's the out of the box realm and creativity that we have to embrace. Otherwise, we're limited, and kind of again, not in a bad way, you're always gonna be here.
That's a great metaphor. Like that period of time where you do go from like that kind of middle school-ish of,
Yeah.
having your clothes picked for you and then starting to experiment and seeing like what other kind of groups of people in your school are wearing. And like you said, like that kind of idea of like, what happens if I try that on? Like, does that
Mhm.
feel good? Does that feel like me? Is very much like this experimenting with music and being like, what happens if I try a hip hop beat in this? Or what happens if I
Yeah.
try something that's a very like country brushes, whatever. Um, does that feel like me? Can I identify with it? Does it feel authentic? Is it working? And I don't know, that's a great metaphor for kind of finding your identity in as an artist, as a songwriter, producer.
And that's interesting that you read the word authenticity, because I think that's what out of the box thinking should lead to, is
Yeah,
the authenticity. It should be honed in even more. If it
yeah,
feels very inauthentic, then I think that's a signal like, okay, we need to kind of like rethink, maybe try something else, but it should lead to authenticity. You're out of the box thinking of, I have to expand Three Theory Records. Okay, what can I do? I'm going to bring in some people that have some things that are going to expand the catalog that I can't reach right now,
yeah,
but they do it authentically. And
yeah,
so when I pitch it, I'm not gonna be like, "Yeah, this is my hip hop album I just released,"
yeah,
"Josh's dope beat," but it's like it's something that feels very real, and that's why I think I enjoy working with artists more that happen to be licensable,
right,
because,
yeah, yeah,
like, there's this period, I think, when people start to pursue licensing, they create all these fake, like, monikers, and it's like some of them are great because they're like, "Oh, no, this is totally who you should be," and
yeah,
there's somewhere I'm like, "That is totally fake, and you're not
yeah,
real, and it's
yeah,
so bad. You need to s it's so bad."
yeah. Yeah, well, like one thing, well,
It could be several things, it doesn't have to be one thing, it could be
yeah,
several things.
man, this is just like sparking all kinds of things. One thing I was gonna say about the kind of like hip hop beats, because I keep on bringing that up,
Yeah,
is, I did take a period of time where I wanted to see if I could learn that skill. I'm a drummer, so I was like, how, like, but I've never really been in the programming side. I've always
yeah.
played what I wanted to have. Um, so what I did is I started a little project where I was going to do an album of um, what do they call it? Gangsta grass, or there's
Really?
another name, like, oh, there's another name for it, where it's basically hip hop beats with like banjo and mandolin. So it's like bluegrass on top and hip hop beats on the bottom. And it
Okay.
gets used all the time, or it has in um like really like it's been placed in like a truck ad where they wanted something that sounded urban but also
Kind of
like
like
had like,
almost like a Kane Brown kinda feel a little bit, where it's like,
I don't know that reference.
okay, so Kane Brown is like he's kinda country, but also hip hop. Like, I had to do
Yeah.
some, like, instrumentals that essentially, like, I took what would be the normal drum
Mhm.
kit, played everything pretty. I had a mandolin, I had banjo, I had some electric guitars, but it was all, like, trap synth, and there was just, like, some lo-fi kicks, and it
Yeah.
was like that Kane Brown feel.
Right, yeah, that's totally the idea. Yeah, and so I use that as, like,
Yeah.
my playground to kinda see, like, could I do this authentically, and did it come together, and it was fun, it was like, because I have a history in, like, I played for country bands for a while, so I kinda knew that realm, and then I knew drums, so all I really needed to do was figure out the drum programming part of it.
Now
Yeah.
that's interesting because that's it's you did that sort of out of the box thing, but it was taking some elements that you were familiar with. So there was
Yeah,
some, I guess, some flooring, I guess, of like you had some of the fundamentals and you
right.
were just kind of trying a different aspect of it. And in
Yeah,
some
because
cases, it's like you love it, or either you go, like, I tried it and you know what? It's just not my thing.
Yeah, because I feel like you might also find this too, that like if you do too many new things where you're trying to like experiment with too many factors at once, then you just lose. It's like trying to juggle too many balls. You're like, I can't. What is working? What isn't working? When you don't have any kind of foundation of that, like this, and this work every day of the week. You can do it in your sleep. this is now the X factor that I'm introducing, and it's kind of a controlled science experiment.
Exactly. It's controlled because you're making that change where you're just like, I'm going to try this new aspect, and you're really focused in. When what you're describing too is like that's where it's like so cluttered and organized, and you say it doesn't work. No, that's a whole host of you're just doing way too much. And I
Yeah.
think this is actually making the case for out of the box thinking and out of the in the case for like adding other elements and other people and other other things because you can't do this on your own.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just like it's going to be limiting, but also too like physically, you're going to run yourself into the ground. But
Yeah.
when you do an out of box, it's a very conscious. I'm adding or focusing on doing this one thing. It's like the advice you gave me about new gear. I remember
Mhm.
you were like, "Don't buy a new plugin or a new piece of gear until you fully understand it."
Yeah,
Which I
yeah.
kind of listened to, but I also didn't at the same time because I totally
Oh,
bought
same here.
way too much.
Yeah, every Black Friday, I'm like, I'm just gonna buy one thing, and that's gonna be my new like thing that I'm gonna really dive. No, I end up buying like 5 things and
I think you
forgetting about
told me
the
that. You were like, "I lost track of what I bought on Black Friday." You were just like, "What did I buy?" Because I think I mentioned Circle. "Hey, these drums," and you were like, "I think I bought I don't know. I think I maybe did."
I know that sounds like yeah, that sounds like I don't know, like a rich person problem. Not that I'm rich or anything, but like basically here's the problem. They put a timer on it. They're like, it's Black Friday. It's only good for 24 hours. You got to buy it right now, or the deal's it's like 70% off. So I feel all this pressure to get it while I can. I'm like, I'll learn them later. I'll introduce them into the flow later.
And what's interesting about that, the idea uh, of the overwhelm that you're saying too, or just like the I'm going to grab it all. I think out of the box thinking also is strategic in a way of understanding that things develop
Yeah.
and that there's no clock on the wall.
Right.
There's no like you're running out of time.
Hmm.
No, it's just like you realize that this, whether it be again, songwriting, production, networking, these are all things that are long term. There's no
Hmm.
set deadline. There's no like the door closes tonight at mid. No, it's the door's open whenever.
Hmm.
It's just how you get there and just being very strategic of how to focus.
Right.
Um, that's what I think is different. I think when there's that overwhelm, that's that overload and the sort of not out of the box and very vanilla, it's just assuming I need to get this because like we're running out of time. It's
Right.
like, what do
Yeah.
you mean? What time? Music doesn't close. There's
Yeah.
no like where it's just like music opportunities close exactly at 5 p.m. every day. It's just like it's not. It's open
Yeah.
whenever, but you have to be strategic in what you're developing. And I think out of the box thinking really hones that in.
Yeah. Can I
And
ask
it's
you?
yeah,
Can I ask
no,
you? No,
no,
this one goes one way. I asked the question.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a something on this that I want to kind of ask how you approach this. When you're working on a new song
Mhm.
and you have identified your references, and I don't know if you're like this, but I usually try to at least pick two because if I just pick one reference, then it kind of can get a little bit dangerous in terms of like really ripping it off. But if
Mhm.
I kind of pick two, then I can be like, oh, I really like the rhythms from this, and then how the melody is structured from this, and then it creates something new, right? When you're
Yeah.
combining ideas. What what is your process for when you're taking two references and trying to combine to create something new and it doesn't work or it's not working? Do you have like a yeah, what's your process for kind of breaking? Is it different every time or do you have like a thing where like I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how you troubleshoot.
So it depends on the song, but it's interesting you mentioned that because it was just like, what's the and I'm like, there is a baseline process, but it
Mm.
could change based on the song. So it's like that's an
Yeah.
example of like it depends. For me, if I have two references, and most of the time I do. I have I have one primary. It's almost like fonts when you have like your primary main font and then
Yeah.
secondary font. There's
Yeah.
my primary reference and the one that's kind of close to it where I'm like still in the same genre. They would be on the same bill together. Like I
Exactly.
wouldn't
Yeah.
see that like, but there's some elements that I like that sonically maybe they're doing and I want to pull them in.
Hmm.
My main thought is if there's anything wrong with the track at first, I'm like, is it just overall structure at
Mm.
first? Is it just like Is it not at first a sound thing? Am I just bored with just the melody? Is it just like, is the song getting uninteresting? And if
Mhm.
the answer is no, and I'm like, no, no, the melody, then I'm actually going in and isolating things. Like I'm like, okay, let me listen to just the percussion.
Yeah.
Okay, that or it and then I just go section by section until it's almost like when you hear like a buzz or a hum in a recording. What do? You go
Yeah.
track by track. It's the same thing with I'll just go track, I'll kind of like get section by section
Mhm.
until and then I'll combine sections. If drums and guitars feel good, then I'll be like, cool. If not, then I'm like, okay, separately they're good, then it's gotta be a sound thing. What is it? Is they not
Yeah.
are they not believable? Kinda like the one track that I showed you where I was like, "Man, the drum parts were great when I listened to them, but when I put them together with it was like didn't feel authentic." Oh, the sound doesn't feel, like,
Mhm.
early Coldplay. It sounds too
Right.
compressed, too like, stadium rock, kinda like, "Yeah!" And I'm like, "That's not Coldplay at all. I wanna hear like a really muffled snare that has like a towel over it." So it's a lot of isolating. Do you do the same or is it different?
No,
What's
and
yours?
yeah, and I wanted to say that I really like that you mentioned, when you do have more than one reference, that you do, um, set one as your primary reference.
Yeah.
Because if you give them equal weight, then you can, again, kinda get really lost and convince yourself that there's I don't know, you can convince yourself of all kinds of things if
It's
both
like if
are
you have 2
yeah.
children, you have a primary child you love more, and then you have your secondary. No, I'm just
You've got
kidding.
the one that's going to college and the one that's gonna learn a trade, so exactly.
No, no, but it
Yeah,
just because you can't do if you have 2 that are trying to be on the same level, you have to favor one, because if you try to
yeah,
get something in the middle, that's where you get vanilla. That's
yeah.
where you because you get nothing. You
Yeah,
get
yeah.
something that's trying to please 2 people. It's not
Mhm.
gonna happen. But yeah, so I'm glad you have a primary one too. I probably stole that from you. You have a
I don't
primary
know.
one and then a secondary.
So my process when things are getting stuck and, again, it is very specific of, like, what is the problem? Is it a
Yeah.
mixing problem? Is it, like is the songwriting is it not hitting, like, the emotional tone? Because that's something I always try and keep track of, like, we're you know, we're in sync, like, everything is about, like, connecting to an emotion, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're even if it's, like, hard rock, like, anthemic, like, arena rock kinda thing, like, that's an emotion. They want that, like, high energy, maybe it's full of testosterone or whatever, or if it's like a Hallmark movie, that's an emotion. So, like, it's all about serving that tone, and usually the thing I'm finding is that I've strayed off that. Sometimes it's a mixing issue where, like, things are muddy and the drums aren't coming through or whatever, but, I do similar to you and just kind of go through, try to really isolate and figure out, like, what's getting in the way of
Mhm.
that, or sometimes I'll even, like, kind of have that heart to heart with myself of, like, did I not start this with the right foundation? Is the wrong tempo? Is it,
Ooh,
um,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, those kind of, like, core issues that you never want to admit to yourself that, like, I didn't start this right and there's no fixing it because it's way too slow and it's never gonna hit that energy.
I
Um,
love that because that's almost like an out of the box thing. If you have a primary song that's your main reference, you're like, "Well, this song's at this specific tempo, and that's what we're gonna do." Yeah, that's a baseline, but is that right for your song? It might
right.
not be, because then
Yeah.
you run into that problem, and that's a tough road where you've built it and you're like, "Oh, no."
Yep.
In your heart of hearts,
Yeah.
it's like
And no
it's
matter
like 2 or 3, like, if it was just this,
Mhm.
then everything would click, but you have to build. Oh,
Yeah, or, like, like and I've had this several times too, and I really try to keep an eye on it. If you've recorded it in the wrong key, where it's like a key that the singer totally can sing, but those money notes that you really had in mind for the chorus, where it's just gonna just land on that money note, if it's not in that range where, like, their voice breaks at that, like, cool spot, in their
yeah,
vocal, um, then it's never gonna happen. The closest I can get to a workaround on that is, like, sometimes I'll have them sing a harmony that's, like, a fifth above, and sometimes I can get away with turning that harmony into the lead. and now they're in that range where it's not the original melody that they
Now, how
sang.
did you discover that?
From like, again, like outside of the box, like I do not want to have to re-record this in a new key. Like I've already paid for session musicians to come in and do these cool parts. It wasn't recorded in MIDI, so it was basically just out of the box thinking of like, what if you sing like the third, the fifth? It was, what it probably was like a thing where they sang the thing, they sang their harmony a third and fifth above, that kind of stuff, whatever. Um, and then they went home, and I was like, man, this is just not that melody, that lead vocal is just not. It sounds like they're just not emoting enough. But this harmony, this could be the thing. Like they really had to fight to hit those notes, and it comes across in a new
Out of
way.
the box thinking is kind of like it's like that scene in Dark Knight where Batman goes, "I'm whatever you want me to be." And it's just like it has different phrases. Like out of the box thinking is
Yeah,
problem solving. Out of the box thinking is, breaking the rules. Out of the box thinking is essentially what you said is invoking that feeling, that emotion that feels authentic. That's
right.
what it should lead to eventually.
Yeah, and
Out
I
of
do
the
want to.
yeah.
I do want to just say really quick that your metaphor about Black Knight is way cooler than mine for Pretty Women, where the guy says, "What's your name?" and she says, "It's whatever you want it to be." I I think they're pretty much the same, Black Knight and Pretty Women.
Dark Knight, Dark Knight.
Oh, Dark Knight. Sorry.
Dark Knight. Yeah, I agree 100%. I actually like that. I've never seen Pretty Woman. I've never
Mm.
seen Pretty Woman. I'm terrible with movies, but that's not yeah, I'm awful with movies. I have, like, the ones that I like, and those are the only ones I watch, and that's it. I don't accept really new things into the I'm like, I'll do that with music, but with, like, TV and movies, that's it. Otherwise, I know
Yeah.
my time's gonna get eaten up because I'm like, I don't wanna get into a new series. I don't. I don't
No,
wanna
man.
care about new people. I don't wanna care because then I'm gonna care, and if I
I know.
care, it's just like, then I'm invested, and if I'm
I know.
invested, there goes my time, and it's
Yeah.
just where are the songs gonna be made? When are the songs gonna be made?
When are the
Um,
donuts being made?
but no, I think out of the box thing is just like it's so many different phrases that some people know and maybe are already adding into their, uh, kind of like into their creative space, with networking, it's yeah, you could send they say send a cold email, but
Mm,
you could, however, take a look and see like, "Oh, what is this person, what have they been creating recently? What have they been doing? What's something that I could support them and help them out with? And could
mm.
I pivot that way?" As opposed to being like, "Hi, I want you to do this thing for me, but can
Yeah.
I present it in a way that's not like a shakedown, but
Right.
actually, like, it's just like an exchange."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can, I feel like really anytime in life, if you can be of service, it's gonna
Ooh,
be a much better relationship.
that's a better phrasing right there. I think of service. It's like when you can see it and you can help
Yeah, yeah,
and like, and also your goal is to also help and provide value, but that's your primary goal and you're not using that. That's not like, oh, maybe this will. No, that's it.
yeah,
That is literally primary because you know that you have this value that you can provide and you can help them.
right.
Why wouldn't you do that?
And I feel like honestly, that's like, not to get all like emotional with each other here, but
Yeah.
I feel like that's how our relationship is like,
Yeah.
when you like sent me mixes of your stuff, like it was never about like, well, I wonder if Mikey's gonna start songwriting for guitar like 10 years down the road and whatever. It was never about that. But the funny thing is like me, doing that, like kind of helping you with yours, it like unbeknownst to me helped me like analyze, like I had never like analyzed other people's mixes in that way, and it helped
Yeah.
me kind of become a better teacher, so it's like I don't know, without, yeah,
I
just
think there's no what's great about out of the box thinking and this sort of like and especially in a collaboration sense, no one's keeping score.
yeah.
It's not like it unless you do. I don't see the score where you're just like, "My score for it,"
It's over
and
here.
yeah, but nobody's keeping score and being like, "Okay, now it's time for me to cash in because
Right.
I've actually been keeping track." And, because in the beginning, I sent you God knows how many songs,
Yeah.
so many different and you always gave thoughtful critiques with never being like, "Okay." Come on.
Yeah, right,
Come
right.
on, man. But what felt good was when eventually I was getting better and moving in that direction, that out of the box, like moving away from vanilla things, but
Yeah,
actually coming into things that were like, "Oh, that song is character." You started sending me songs, be like, "Hey, could you listen to this really quick? And I need you." And I was like, "Ooh,
yeah,
okay, let me just put on this." And then, but it was exciting because that to me was just a sign of like, "Oh, you think I could provide some sort of insight to what you're doing."
yeah, and, you touch on something we haven't yet, and it's super important in that whole out of box thing,
Yeah,
is when you do get stuck, sending it off to, like, a trusted friend to help them
yeah,
hear with those new ears. That's gold right there. The only, like, thing that I really would wanna stress on that is make sure that you're not just sending it to anybody. I made this mistake early
yeah.
on. I would, like, have my wife listen to it. Send it to my mom, whatever. Like, what do you think about this? And she'd be like, "This is nice, honey." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. What do you think? Like, is that like bass drum like really? Are we like, what do you think about this bridge? Should
Yeah.
I rewrite it?" "No, honey, that's perfect. Coca-Cola is gonna love to use your song." I'm like, "This is not helping at all." So just make sure that like who you're sending is gonna give you that like honest, that honest feedback that's really gonna they're not holding back and they really have good ears.
I love that because it's the same thing. If I play something from she'd be like, "Honey, that's darling." It's
Yeah.
that's my mom's thing for
No.
everything. It's darling. It's darling. It's so darling. But I think what you're touching on too is important. Like, you should look at that person and the way they problem solve, the way
Yeah.
that they create. Does it have those things? Does it have those characteristics of someone who thinks out of the box that isn't just going to be like, "Well, what DB did you?" Okay, so that's why.
Yeah.
They're going
Right.
to ask specifically some like they're not gonna ask always the very vanilla questions, but they're gonna
Mhm.
ask some things that'll make you go like, "Oh,
Mhm.
okay." That's the kind of person because they're gonna give you responses that are gonna help push you out of your kind of like your safe zone, but
Yeah.
actually push yourself as a creative, to push yourself as a songwriter, as a producer, as a person that regardless if you wanna pitch your songs for, an artist or license, they're gonna push you in that direction for that growth, and I think the ones that do it well surround themselves with people that are not necessarily their moms that are saying they're good, but they're also not surrounding themselves with people that are like, "Oh, I haven't grown in the past 5 years, but I have this thing that said I got from this school."
Right. Yeah.
They're looking for the ones regardless of whatever degree it is. Are they doing it? And are they
Yeah.
doing it well?
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's
Like, I
and
don't
that
think I've ever in any of, like, the education or help that I've ever pursued from others, I've never like, when I sent you, I'm like, can you remind me, Mike, of your qualifications? What was your GPA in college?" Like, never asked any of that. I'm like,
and that's why I was like, I dropped out of college and I barely did high school. I barely graduated. I like Sue. Moms are the best. Yeah, you
"Moms
know
are
what?
the best."
It depends on what you're looking for. And this gets into another realm of like, having people that are I'm reading this book called, Buy Yourself the Fucking Lilies, which is really good, and she talks about
Oh.
who are your cheerleaders, who are your warriors, who are kind of like
Ooh.
your tribesmen, and they're different ones where you need people for different levels of, like,
Yeah.
growth, and especially when you're doing that out of the box, there are people that you need to go to that are literally just that are your support, that are just there like a mom, just be like, "You're doing
Yeah.
awesome, keep going," and there's
Right.
some that, like, I'm going to you, and I'm like, "Dude, I yes, I do wanna hear that you like the track, but what I really wanna hear about is where can it get better? Where can it move
Yeah.
beyond that stage of like, okay, that's not better, that's not bad, but it's like, this'll make it really great. Like, this is
Mhm.
actually where it's like, I kinda wanna write this now because this
Yeah.
is like that's the kind of song that to me is the biggest compliment when you listen to someone's song and you're like, "I wish I had written this because this is
Mhm.
really good."
Yeah. That I love that, and the thing that I was kinda thinking about is the balance that you need in that, like your cheerleader and your warriors, and the thing that I find is that if you lean or spend too much time with either of those 2 groups, like if you spend too much time with your cheerleaders, you're never gonna improve because they're
Mhm.
always gonna be telling you that everything smells great and, you know, all of that. But it is important. Like, if you spend too much time with
Yeah.
your warriors, the ones that are really critiquing your work and, like, pushing you to be better and, like, not, like, stroking your ego, if you spend too much time with them, that can really wear on you. And, even though it might be the truth and you really do need to put work on, you need that balance. Like you need both of them.
You absolutely need both of them because especially for the idea of what we do, there's no mountaintop.
Yeah.
It's just a continual journey in music. And I
Yeah.
think out of the box thinking, creatives are aware of this and they have both. And they understand there are times when they wake up that they need to hear certain things, and there are times that they have to hear the other. But
Yeah.
it's never leaning heavily towards one side. They realize the importance of both
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just moving forward with that, which I think is super important. But
Yeah.
especially in the new year, for those that want to do this that are striving to do songwriting for a living, to do production for a living, eventually they come to this point where it was like out of the box thinking is going to have to happen because there's no book.
Yeah.
When the chapter ends in your production 101 course, or when it gets into your songwriting course, there's never a moment where it was like, then you go buy this out of the box production music guide, which will give you every single scenario. You just have to be aware that that's going to happen. And it's this unknown. If I were to do one more movie reference, it's like in Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade,
Yeah.
where he's walking across to the Grail, and there's like that basically that chasm that looks
Mhm.
dark, and
Yeah.
he has no idea what's happening, but he has to take that step to cross over.
Right.
And what
Right.
he does, he sees that there's some footing. I think that's out of the box. At first, it's really scary because you're
Yeah.
like, what if this doesn't work? But it's like, yeah, but what if it does? And it
Yeah.
ends up
Right.
being the thing that you use for like half the cool things that I saw when watching you do production or other producers. They had all these little things. And I'm like, where do you what course did you take?
Right. Yeah.
There's
I
not.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's not, and I wish there was a way. I mean, I wish there was a way to like download that, but like even when I asked that question about like when you do get stuck with like combining two references
Mhm.
and things like, and your answer was like spot on. Like it just depends, and it's so specific on what you're working on, and
Yeah.
you just have to go through it and put in the reps and things like that. I did want to ask one thing, like kind of stepping back, the idea of the importance, when you're spending time with your warriors and they're giving that
Mhm.
that hard feedback, the importance of having thick skin and not taking things personally and being able to step back and look at it as if it's not your own. Is that something that's always been easy for you? Like, or did you have to develop that consciously? Did you ever
Well,
get like offended? Yeah.
I went to Catholic school, so I think thick skin is just like it's the first thing that's in all there. You know what? Part of me wanted to do this, that I realized that this was just going to have to inevitably happen. Yeah, you know what? Another thing helped was being in a band, and there's some people that was just like, "Your band sucks."
Right.
Okay, I have to. There's nothing I can do about that. Or
Yeah.
there's just different levels, like the thing that we're on here, a platform, YouTube,
Mhm.
any social media ads that we've run, things that we've done, there's always comments where someone's like, "You suck. This was the worst piece of advice," or it's just like, "I don't like this." I have to realize, especially if I'm meeting with someone that's gonna give me advice, it's gonna help me.
Mhm.
Why I'm doing this is not to feel good, but to know how to get closer to the things that I wanna do. So just
Yeah.
remember that. That's it. That's why I'm
Yeah.
doing this. It's gonna help me.
Right.
And I think that now there are definitely moments where it was like I probably had in my head, "They're gonna love it.
Oh, I
This is gonna
know.
be so good." And then it's just like it was immediately just like they went into this whole host of what needed to get better. It was like, "Oh,
Yeah. That's
okay."
yeah, that's
Whoo,
tough.
and it's like you have like that like internal cry,
Yeah.
but then it's only short term. Like you have that
Mhm.
moment of just kind of feeling bad, but then I think you make a conscious decision of, and this is what separates those again from the do it that don't. There are those that get it, and you go, cool. And then that skin gets a little bit thicker, like learning guitar. First couple of practices are rough. Your fingers get really, just those calluses are rough, but then they start to build up and they
Right?
get better. You're okay with it. Yeah. Your chorus, so you need to learn to write choruses where the melody doesn't hit so heavy in the verse, so that when you get to your chorus, it doesn't feel like, oh, we've
Yeah.
already reached the ceiling long ago. You're aware of it. Cool. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But then there are those that hear that advice that then don't do anything because they choose rather to be affected by that and be like, well, I
Mhm.
guess this means I can't do it. No, no, no. It's alerting you on what needs fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is that bad? They're
Right.
telling you exactly what you need to work on. Do you know
Yeah.
how many people wander their lives wondering what needs fixed? You've got someone, especially if you're using the criteria that you mentioned, that's doing it, that is doing it well, and is also willing to let you know, like, hey, this is what needs to change. Even if it's not like a pat on the back, they're showing you some sort of like kindness because they want you to get better.
Yeah, honestly, and that's a huge point right there too, like, that I think I try to remind people of, that honestly, like, I only give feedback and spend the time to really kind of, like, go through and listen and that kind of thing to the people that I actually think can do something about it, right? Like, if
Yeah.
there's somebody that's, like, just just picking up guitars, like, "I just picked up my first guitar last week, and I've almost got my first chord," like, that kinda thing, and then they send me a recording and, they want a bunch of notes. No, I'm not gonna give you notes, like, you have a lot of work that needs to be done before, like, anything that I say
Yeah.
would even be applicable, like, and not to be rude, but it's just, like, it would distract you if I started talking about, like, compressor settings or like internal rhymes or anything like that. Like, that's just not where you're at right now. So, not to like say that I'm like any big deal or anything, but if I spend the time to actually give you the feedback, give you those notes, it means that I believe in you. It means that I think that you're going somewhere, that you're on
I
the right path.
I think that's just an important thing for when someone's pursuing the idea of, like, getting that critique going
Yeah.
forward, is just remember that. If you're getting it, it means they know you can do it, but there
Yeah.
are just some things that need to happen along the way.
Right. Right.
Um, dude, this is why I think we'll do more of these where we just keep on going, but it's like, it's interesting that this is I think that's what out of the box thinking does. It leads to all these other things that then, cool, there's a thing beyond.
Yeah.
There's another level, and then there's gonna be another level, which is crazy. I'd be curious, we got chat in here. Any questions on out of the box thinking? We got people, let me see. Vicky's here. Hey, Vicky. Of course, Mike's here. Sue is here. Um, Colette's here. That's a nice name, Colette. I love that.
This is a nice name.
Yeah, it is that. You don't hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But it's cool that folks are here. And we're gonna do this in the podcast. This is gonna be just kind of like you can ask questions along the way. Liz Shaw is gonna be our guest next week, which I'm super. He has a podcast called Rockstar Recording Podcast, which is
I love
really
that
good.
podcast.
I know it's such a good podcast.
It is.
It's
Yeah, it's
so
a good
good.
one.
He's based in Nashville, and so
Yeah.
we're gonna do a podcast next week, and then we've got a few other people. Howie Spangler is gonna be on here.
Nice.
Laney's going to be doing one. My friend Clint is going to be doing this. So thanks for hanging out, everyone. If you got questions, we're here. But for the next couple of minutes, unless we're not, we just leave, and then we can just.
Unless we just turn this thing off.
And then next week this podcast will be out. But this was wonderful. This was our first, doing the podcast live on the YouTubes where all the kids are on the YouTubes. But
Yeah, yeah.
if you watched all the way through, thank you for being a part of it. And I encourage everybody, watching this regardless of what aspect, whether it be, again, whether it be songwriting, production, networking, out of the box thinking is going to be, it's going to happen. You're going to run into
Yeah.
it at some point. Mark's here. Mark. Yes. He was
Yeah.
like, this is cool. No problem, Mark. Glad you can
Yeah.
enjoy it.
I do
Yeah.
want to just say, like, the very last thing you mentioned, like, it's been, yeah, it really like hits, like, the whole out of the box thinking really does apply to everything.
Yeah.
Like, if you apply it, right? Like, even just like the getting feedback on your song and not taking it personally, it is a form of out of the box thinking to learn to not take it personally and to learn to like step back and be like, okay, if I was if I was the friend of the person receiving this feedback, how would I feel? It's not my song, you know, like, and
Ooh.
thinking, like, putting yourself in those different positions to hear the feedback in those new ways, you know?
I love that idea of detaching yourself, and what
Yeah.
if I was the that is, like that's actually a really good idea, because
Yeah.
it harshens kind of like that wound a little bit of just like
Mhm.
or we should say it's the wounding of the ego. That's what it
Yeah,
is. It's the
totally.
wounding of the ego, and any book that I've read on mindset and, like, anything going forward, it's just like you've gotta lessen that down a
Yeah.
ton, like a
Yeah.
whole bunch.
Yeah.
Um Dude, this was awesome. I'm so
It
glad
was.
that we could do
Yeah.
this, and we'll do this more and more. Charlie, thanks for joining. And yeah, this will be out next week, and then again, I'll be going live next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Central.
Nice.
Liz will be joining me from the Recording Rock Stars. It's awesome. It's such a good podcast. You should check out. Yeah, check out mine, but also check out his because there's so many good episodes
There are.
of breaking down the process. So, all
Yeah.
right, everyone, we will talk soon, and we'll see you next week.